My name is Nora Whitfield, and I'm 35 years old. 19 days before Christmas, a text meant for someone else landed on my phone by accident. That's how I discovered I'd be spending the holidays watching 5 children while the rest of my family boarded a cruise ship to the Caribbean. My mother had already told the whole family I'd agreed to it. Nobody had actually asked me. It was sitting there in black and white, wedged between the shuttle time and the dinner reservation, like an afterthought. Nora's got the kids, December 21st through the 26th, locked in. So I made my own plans, quietly, completely, and in writing. What my mother found on my front porch 2 days before Christmas made her scream loud enough that a neighbor 2 houses down stopped his car mid-driveway. And that was before she found out about the plane ticket. Welcome to the channel, where the family members everyone took for granted finally stop staying quiet. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. And if you've ever been the one your family assumes will say yes without being asked, hit subscribe, because this story is going to feel uncomfortably familiar. Let me explain what I meant to my family, because I think in numbers it's what I do for a living. I run a small bookkeeping firm in a town most people have never heard of. My name is on the door, 12 years of clients who bring me banana bread every April. I bought my own house at 28, a modest craftsman with a wraparound porch, and I was proud of it for exactly 1 week, about how long it took my mother to rename it. Not my house. The overflow house. Overflow bedroom for cousins. Overflow garage for my brother's boat. Overflow aunt for every date night, every stomach bug, every school break that didn't line up with somebody's shift. I did the whole family's taxes every spring free. I hosted every Easter because my kitchen photographed better. I kept a drawer of juice boxes and spare pajamas in 3 kids' sizes just in case. And I need you to understand, I adore those 5 children completely. My niece's drawings are taped all over my fridge. This was never about them. It was about the fact that for over a decade, nobody had once asked me, "Are you free?" Because the answer had already been decided somewhere far above my head, by a woman who ran our family like a logistics company. My mother, Diane, 62, sharp as a paper cut, has never once lost an argument with a calendar. Whenever I did the math out loud, the hosting, the sitting, the free tax returns, she had one response, delivered with a gentle squeeze of my wrist. "It's not work when it's family, sweetheart." I believed that sentence for nearly 20 years. There was an envelope in my kitchen drawer I hadn't opened in 3 years. Hold on to that, it matters later. In my family, every conversation ran through my mother first. We didn't have a group chat. We had a switchboard. My sister called Mom, and Mom relayed it to me, and somewhere in that relay the message always got edited. My brother's news arrived pre-spun. Mine left pre-softened. She kept it all logged in a battered leather planner she'd carried since the 90s, birthdays, surgeries, grudges, all in the same blue ink. If you wanted the truth about anyone, you asked Diane, which meant you got Diane's version of it. My father, Roger, 64, was a gentle man built out of apology. His entire vocabulary for conflict was, "Your mother means well." My sister, Paige, 32, had 3 kids under 10 and the 1,000-yard stare that comes standard with it. My brother, Grant, 37, and his wife Marissa had 2 young kids and a talent for arriving right as the last dish hit the table. None of them were villains. I need you to hear that. They were tired people who'd been handed one convenient fact their whole adult lives. Nora's got it. Nora doesn't mind. And the only person who ever actually delivered that fact to them was the one person we all called instead of each other. I remember scrubbing someone else's dishes one holiday night, realizing I couldn't recall the last time my own brother, and I had exchanged information the way 2 adults with working phones normally do. Every thread in this family ran through one set of hands. That's not a family tree. That's a switchboard with one operator. And in November, without meaning to, my mother sent a spark down the one wire she never expected anyone else to see. Here's the oldest entry in the ledger. I was 15 the first time this happened. The whole family flew to Orlando for a week, my parents, my aunt and uncle, my cousins, matching souvenir shirts. I stayed home and watched 4 young children, ages 2 through 9, for 7 straight days. You might ask how a 15-year-old ends up with that job. She doesn't end up with it. She gets announced into it. My mother told a room full of relatives it was already settled. Nora offered to stay back. She's never been much for roller coasters anyway. I stood frozen in the kitchen doorway, hearing my own decision narrated to my aunt, complete with a personality I never had. I loved roller coasters. Nobody had asked me about that in over a year. But that's the arithmetic kids in a house like mine learn fast. Correct her in front of everyone and you're difficult. Say nothing and you're wonderful. They brought me back a snow globe. My mother told that story for years, glowing. Nora's just built different. Some girls are born responsible. A daughter who arrived factory-equipped with no plans of her own, as far as she was concerned, the discovery of the century. A lie needs a date on it to become real. That one was still a rehearsal. The real one, with dates attached, came 20 years later. And it turns out a snow globe is exactly what 2 decades of holidays look like when you shrink them down small enough to fit in a hand. There was exactly one person in my family who never used the switchboard. My grandmother, Vivian, my mother's own mother, though you'd never guess it. Vivian had emigrated from a fishing village on the west coast of Ireland at 19, and she carried that place in her voice for the rest of her life. She left with one suitcase and her mother's rosary, and she liked to say, "The sea got me here, and stubbornness did the rest." Vivian was the only adult who ever asked me a real question and then actually waited for the answer. Whenever the family assigned me another task, she'd find me afterward in the kitchen, hand me a dish towel, and ask quietly, "And what is it you want, love?" I never had an answer ready. That's the part that still humbles me. The question used to make my mind go blank, like a form in a language I'd never studied. She died when I was in my mid-20s. At the reading of her modest estate, there was an envelope with my name on it, written in her slanted handwriting. Inside, $300 in worn 20s, a postcard of a small harbor with painted fishing boats and green hills, and 4 words, "For your someday, love." That envelope sat in my kitchen drawer, under old takeout menus, for 3 years. I couldn't spend it. Spending it meant admitting I actually had a someday coming, and I was already fully booked being everybody else's Tuesday. But I always knew exactly where it was, the way you know where the fire extinguisher is, even if you've never once needed it. Then, on a random Tuesday night in November, my mother struck the match. 9:42 p.m. I was at my kitchen table with a mug of tea and a shoebox of client receipts when my phone lit up. "Mom." A long, carefully composed message, clearly written with thought, and clearly never meant to land in my inbox. It was the cruise itinerary. 6 adults, my parents, my sister and her husband, my brother and his wife. 5 nights in the Caribbean, out of Port Canaveral December 21st, back the 26th. Shuttle times, dinner seatings, a note about my father's blazer for formal night. And there it was, 4th line down, tucked between the logistics. My entire holiday decided without me. Nora's got the kids. December 21st to 26th. Locked in. I read it 3 times. I actually glanced behind me, half expecting another Nora in the room. 5 children, 6 days, locked in. A phrase from my own professional life, one that only ever means both parties have signed off. I set the phone down carefully, the way you'd set down something ticking. Before I could process it, it buzzed again. A second message, still meant for someone else. My mother, still typing to the daughter she assumed she was talking to. "Don't say anything to her about the cruise yet. You know how she gets." I sat with that sentence a long time. You know how she gets. 35 years old, and I just learned my whole role in this family from a wrong number text. Not a sister, or a daughter, or even really a babysitter. A scheduling problem with feelings, managed on a strict need-to-know basis. The tea went cold. The receipt sat untouched. Somewhere across town, my mother was finishing the plans for my Christmas. And in my drawer, under the takeout menus, that envelope somehow felt louder than it had in years. I called her the next morning. I'd rehearsed it in the shower, the car, my desk between appointments, calm sentences, reasonable tone. I got exactly 1 full sentence out. "Mom," I saw the text. "You can't just schedule me like this." What came back was a masterclass, and I want to walk you through it, because if you grew up with a Diane of your own, you'll recognize every move. First, the reframe. "It's not babysitting, honey. It's not work when it's your own blood." Second, the audit of my life. "What else would you even be doing? It's not like you've got a house full." Third, the appeal to the season. "Christmas is for the children, Nora. The adults make it happen. That's what we do, we doing heroic lifting, considering 6 adults were about to make Christmas hap." N from a pool deck. And fourth, the closer, soft as a lullaby, you're so good with them. That's a compliment, sweetheart. By minute 6, I heard something scarier than anything she'd said. My own voice apologizing automatically. Sorry, I only meant, the same verbal curtsy I'd performed since I was 15, smoothing it over, backing out of my own point like it was a stranger's driveway. I hung up having agreed to nothing and refused nothing, which in my family's math always rounds up to yes. I drove home on my lunch break, opened the kitchen drawer, and took out the envelope. I didn't open it yet. I just needed to hold the question. That night, I did the thing I do when the world stops making sense. I ran the numbers. I pulled 10 years of old planners off the shelf. I keep everything, and went through every holiday like a forensic auditor, line by line, highlighter in hand. 9 of the last 10 Christmases, hosted by me or spent watching children while their parents went to parties I heard about later. Every Easter since I bought the house. Most Thanksgivings. That stretch when Paige had her second baby and I quietly ran 2 households on my lunch breaks for 6 weeks. Date nights, sick days, snow closures. One column, what I gave. The other, what I'd actually been paid. And I don't mean money. I mean invitations that were really assignments. Compliments that were really performance reviews. You're so good with them, she's just built different. A snow globe. I do books for a living. I know unpaid labor when I see it laid out in front of me. And I was staring at 2 decades of it, single-spaced. Somewhere around midnight, the feeling I'd been circling all day finally landed, and it surprised me. Not rage, something quieter and far more useful. Clarity, the kind you get when a client finally hands you the real books. My family didn't have a babysitting problem. They had a billing problem, and I was the department that had never once sent an invoice. I closed the planner. I have never felt calmer in my life. If you've ever been the one everybody counts on, tell me in the comments. And stay with me, because my mother was about to learn what locked in actually means. Thanksgiving landed 2 days later at my parents' house. I waited until every plate was full and everyone was seated, because I'd learned this trick from the best. Information delivered to a whole room at once can't be quietly edited on the way down the relay line. Before everyone locks in their schedules, I need you all to know I won't be available December 21st through the 26th. Fork stopped. My sister-in-law glanced at my brother. My sister looked at my mother, and my mother didn't even look up from the cranberry sauce. She smiled, the hostess smile, no weather behind it, and said, as if I were a radio playing in the next room, ignore her. She always says that. The table laughed. Kindly, even. My uncle chuckled into his stuffing. The conversation rolled on toward the rolls, and my announcement, clear adult words, spoken aloud, dissolved like sugar into warm tea. I sat there with my fork frozen, watching my own no get downgraded to a passing mood, in real time, in front of everyone I loved. 20 years of being easy had built my mother a machine. She never had to argue with me because the whole family had been gently trained to find my objections adorable. I said it once more, quieter. I'm serious this time. My mother patted my hand without pausing her sentence to my aunt. That pat was the final word. I skipped dessert. I had an email to write. I drove home and sat down at my laptop like I was taking a witness stand. If the spoken word couldn't survive the switchboard, fine. I work in a profession where spoken promises mean nothing and written records mean everything. 6 recipients: my parents, my sister, her husband, my brother, his wife. 1 thread, no relay possible, reply, all built in. Subject line, December 21, 26. I kept the body short, because short can't be edited into something else. I wrote that I loved them, and I loved the kids. I wrote that I would not be available December 21st through the 26th. I wasn't asking permission, and it wasn't up for discussion. So no one was left stranded. I attached 3 childcare options I'd personally called and confirmed. A woman from church, a college student who sat for half the neighborhood, and a holiday day camp, phone numbers included, because I'm apparently incapable of leaving a problem without an appendix. I read it twice, changed nothing, hit send at 9:58 p.m. Then I sat back and felt the strangest thing. The floor didn't open. Lightning declined to strike. For the first time in my life, I had put something true about myself in writing that my mother could not retell, reframe, or pat into submission. It existed now, time-stamped, in 6 inboxes. The family archive finally had one document Diane Whitfield hadn't written herself. I slept 9 hours straight, clinically. The best night's sleep I'd had in years. The responses started at dawn. My brother replied first, typing from the gym floor. Lol, okay, drama queen. See you on the 21st. My sister-in-law never replied at all, the message just sat there, marked seen. My father called and left a voicemail that was 90% throat-clearing, ending with your mother means well. My sister called on her lunch break, a toddler negotiating something in the background. Nora, it's one Christmas. Why are you making this a whole thing? I told her I'd made it a written thing precisely so it wouldn't become a scene, and the sitter list was vetted and cheaper than her checked bags. And then she said the sentence that rearranged the whole board. I don't get it. Mom told us back in October you'd already volunteered, that you offered so the rest of us could finally take a trip. That's why nobody asked you, we thought it was settled. October, the cruise had been booked in October. I looked out my office window and ran the timeline like a client audit. There was no honest misunderstanding at the bottom of this. There was a transaction. My mother had spent my name like a gift card, told 6 people I'd offered something I'd never mentioned, and sat on it for 6 weeks, waiting for the drop-off date to simply arrive. That's not what happened, Paige. I found out from a text that was never even meant for me. A long pause, a baby babbling. Mom wouldn't just make that up, my sister said, slower this time, like someone rereading a receipt she was starting to suspect had been altered. My mother didn't respond to the email. She responded in person, 3 days later, carrying a bakery box, because Diane Whitfield never arrives anywhere without a prop. She set the box on my desk, told my receptionist to hold my calls, and then did something I didn't see coming. She cried, not the composed hostess tears, real ones. She told me about being 14 when her own mother, my grandmother Vivian, got seriously ill, and how she, the eldest of 5, ran that kitchen for 2 years. Lunches packed, siblings bathed, dinner by 6, homework checked at an age when her friends were learning to drive. Nobody ever asked me either, she said. And for one dangerous second, the room tilted, because there it was, the original invoice, the debt that had started this whole ledger. My mother had been me, long before I was born. I reached across the desk. I almost took her hand. And then she straightened her coat, and the shine came back into her eyes, and she delivered the sentence she'd actually driven over to say. Being needed is being loved, Nora. Family is what I built instead of a life for myself, and it's the best thing I ever built. One day, you'll thank me for it. She stood, patted the box once, and left, having reclassified my objection as ingratitude. Lemon bars, my favorite. That's my mother, the ammunition was always something you loved. That night, I opened the envelope. 3 years and it came apart soft as fabric, the way old paper does when it's been handled by someone who loved it. $300 in worn 20s, smelling faintly of rosewater. The postcard, a painted harbor, boats in every color, hills so green they looked argued into being. For your someday, love. I cried for about 90 seconds. Timed it, kettle to whistle. Then I opened my laptop and built my someday like a legal case. A flight through Dublin, departing December 21st at 6:40 a.m., a bus out along the coast road. A bed and breakfast 2 streets up from the harbor, run by a woman named Maeve whose booking page said, "You'll want the front room, you can hear the sea from the pillow." Here's the detail everything else hinges on. I booked it non-refundable on purpose. Cheaper, yes, but that's not why. I know exactly who I am. I am the woman who has folded for 20 consecutive holidays. I know precisely the sound my own resolve makes right before it cracks, so I built a door that only locked from the outside. Vivian's 20s covered most of it. I covered the rest. When the confirmation landed, I printed it out, on paper, like a vow, and stood in my kitchen holding my own someday in both hands. I pinned the boarding pass to the fridge, dead center, under the strongest magnet I owned. I need to explain what that door actually meant in my house, because it was never an appliance. It was a bulletin board of everyone else's lives, school calendars, my niece's crayon art, a save-the-date for a wedding I was apparently already scheduled to drive 4 kids to. The whole door was a map of exactly where my time went. It was the first thing on that fridge in over 10 years with my name on it as the passenger, not the driver. 2 days later, my sister stopped by to return a slow cooker. 3 kids buckled into the running car outside. A drive-by, the only visit format my family still knew. She walked into my kitchen mid-sentence about a dance recital, saw the fridge, and stop. Ed talking. She stood there with the slow cooker still in her arms, reading my boarding pass twice. I watched her face move through surprise, then quiet arithmetic, then something like witnessing. "You're actually serious," she said. "I have never been more serious about anything," I told her. She didn't argue. My exhausted little sister, the one who told me to stop making a thing out of nothing, looked at a piece of paper with a departure time on it and understood in 4 seconds what 3 weeks of my actual words hadn't landed. At 11 that night, my phone lit up. "What did your email actually say? Forward it to me." Somewhere across town, the switchboard had just lost its first subscriber. My mother stopped arguing with me altogether. I'd expect nothing less from a strategist. When the defendant won't settle, you stop negotiating and start seating the jury. At church that Sunday, 3 women found me by the coat rack to say how wonderful I was. What a gift. How my mother glowed whenever she talked about her Nora taking the children for cruise week. My aunt called Tuesday, allegedly about a recipe, really about sacrifice, and how some women were simply born givers. "Do you see the architecture?" My mother had told our whole congregation, the extended family, the entire watching town, that I was taking those children, settled fact, exactly like Orlando, except now the stakes were 5 kids and a sailing date. And every repetition poured another inch of concrete around my no. If I got on that plane, I wouldn't just be skipping a babysitting shift. I'd be the woman who abandoned 5 children at Christmas after promising them she wouldn't, because the promise had already been made, publicly, in my name, by somebody else. Brilliant, the way a bear trap is brilliant. She wasn't building an argument. She was building a jury, and the verdict had already been drafted. Paper trails convince honest people. For everyone else, there was going to have to be an empty porch. My father came alone on a Thursday, which never happened. He stood on my porch turning his cap over in both hands like a man at a graveside. He sat at my kitchen table and drank the coffee I made him, visibly miserable about his assigned errand. "Your mother means well," he opened, right on cue before gently landing the ask. "It's only 5 days, kiddo, just this once more." I want to be honest, that one nearly got me. Not her guilt, not the church ladies. This kind old man in a clean flannel shirt asking softly, "Rage you can wall out. Gentleness comes in under the door." I felt the old reflexive yes forming in my throat. Then, over his shoulder, I saw the fridge. Departing 6:40 a.m., I took a breath and did the math out loud for the gentlest man in my family. "Dad, this once more, I've been hearing that for 20 years, I counted. It's never once and it's never more in my direction." He looked down into his coffee for a long moment. I told him about the sitters, the email, the plan that the kids would be fine, and the only thing actually in danger that week was a 20-year-old precedent. My father is not a fast man, but he's never been a stupid one either. He stood at the door a long moment, cap already back on. Then he said the strangest, best thing he's ever said to me. "Vivian would have liked this," he said quietly, not quite meeting my eyes. Then he went home to my mother. I later heard I had simply seemed busy. My mother simply proceeded as though reality would eventually fold before she did. A week out, she emailed the finalized itinerary, and there it still was, untouched, line 4. "Nora's got the kids, locked in." She called twice that week. Both times, food preferences, no acknowledgement of my no. No reference to the email, just gentle administrative instructions in the tone of a woman briefing a subordinate she fully trusts. It was surreal. Talking to my mother that December felt like arguing with a printed calendar. You could say anything you wanted to it, and it would still calmly say December 21st, "Nora's got the kids." I understand now exactly what she was doing, because it had worked her entire life. She was maintaining the reality she preferred, waiting for everyone else to move into it. Most people fold under that much certainty. It's cheaper than the fight. Then, on December 20th at 4 in the afternoon, my doorbell rang, and my mother stood on my porch with 2 small rolling suitcases, a mermaid one and a dinosaur one, set side by side in front of my door like a delivery. She didn't ask to come in. She's never had a key. The porch was always as far as her jurisdiction extended, and some part of her already knew it. "We'll drop the rest off tomorrow at 7, she said, already turning to leave. "Don't be dramatic. Here's the thing about people who have never once truly heard your no. Eventually, you have to show them." I stood inside my own front door and looked at those 2 suitcases through the glass, luggage packed for children whose parents had been told, by someone they trusted, that this door would open. That was the exact moment this stopped being about me. I didn't touch the suitcases. I called my sister. When she answered, I heard the television, the dishwasher, her actual life. "Paige, listen to me like a sister, not like mom's daughter. Tomorrow at 7, do not bring your kids to this house. My flight leaves at 6:40. This isn't a bluff, isn't a mood, and isn't a negotiation that goes to a second round. Nobody will be home. Please protect your kids from this plan." Silence except a cartoon in the background. Then quietly, "Mom swore you'd fold, not you'll." You'd, past tense. A done deal, already forecast, already leaned on by everyone. That's when I finally saw the whole shape of it. My no had never made it into the family's operating reality because the switchboard had been broadcasting its own weather report the entire time. "She'll cave. She always caves." "I know she did," I said. "She's been wrong since November." Another silence. Then my sister, exhausted, 3 kids deep into a life with zero margin, said the first fully load-bearing thing anyone in my family had said to me all month. "Okay, the kids stay with me, go." I stood in my kitchen a long time just breathing. One down, one left, the hard one. At 10 that night, headlights swept back into my driveway. My mother back for the suitcases because Paige had told her to bring them home. I braced for the storm. Instead, she sat down on my porch steps in the cold, still in her good coat, and patted the space beside her. And because she is my mother, I sat. She told me about her own Aunt Colleen, Vivian's sister-in-law, never married, no children, worked at the county records office for 40 years. Every Christmas of my mother's childhood, Colleen had run the kitchen, watched all the cousins, sewn the pageant costumes, and never once missed a year. That woman was the glue of that whole family, my mother said, voice going warm. I braced myself. And then it came. She died alone in that little apartment. It was 4 days before anyone thought to check on her. My mother let that sit. Then she turned to me, eyes shining, and delivered what she genuinely believed was the moral. And at her funeral, the entire family came. Every single one of us packed into those pews. That's what a life adds up to, Nora. That's the whole point. I looked at my mother and finally understood completely. She hadn't been lying, not once. She had been at that funeral. She had seen the empty apartment and the packed church, and done the math with the only formula she'd ever been taught, and arrived at a single conclusion: worth it. My mother had learned exactly the wrong lesson at that funeral, and had been teaching it to me my whole life. "Mom," I said gently, "who actually called Colleen back in February?" She looked at me, she didn't answer. She picked up the suitcases and drove home. I didn't sleep much. I sat at my kitchen table with 2 dead women for company, grim, but they were good company. Aunt Colleen, whom I'd never met, 50 Christmases of glue, 4 days of nobody checking in. My grandmother Vivian, 1 suitcase off a boat at 19, who built a life out of stubbornness and still found room to ask a quiet girl in a kitchen what she actually wanted. 2 women, no husbands, no children of their own. 2 different ways a life like that can go. Around 1 in the morning, my thumb did something my brain hadn't authorized. It opened the airline app, found my reservation, and hovered over the cancellation number. I watched my own hand do it, almost from a distance, the way you'd watch weather rolling in. Because here's the thing nobody warns you about the night before you finally keep a promise to yourself. It's not the guilt that nearly gets you. It's the gravity. 20 years of orbit doesn't release you because you printed a boarding pass. Then I got up, walked to the fridge, and took down Vivian's postcard, tucked right beside the boarding pass. Colored boats. Green hills. For your someday, love. Some inheritances come as money. Mine came as a question, asked once in a kitchen by the only person who ever waited for my answer, and it had been waiting 19 years for me to finally give it one. "And what do you want, Nora?" I closed the app. I set the phone to charge in the hallway, out of reach of my own weakness. Then I set 2 alarms and slept like a woman behind a locked door. 5:20 in the morning. My house sat dark except the light over the stove. My suitcase stood ready by the door. The taxi's headlights swung up the street right on schedule. I did the walkthrough you do without meaning to, locked the back door, watered the poinsettia my niece and nephews had given me, straightened the empty magnet on the fridge. The boarding pass was folded in my coat pocket now, warm as a passport into a different life. My phone had started buzzing at 4:55. Mom, missed call, Mom. Missed call, Grant. Mom, an unknown number. Mom, a voicemail. Mom. 7 calls from her alone by the time the taxi idled at my curb. I want to be precise about what I did because it matters to who I was trying to become. I silenced the ringer but didn't turn the phone off. Turning it off would have felt like hiding, and I was done hiding. I'd resigned from that in writing back in November. I was leaving in the open, on a documented schedule headed to a confirmed address. There's a real difference between running away and simply departing. The difference is paperwork, and mine was immaculate. As the driver loaded my bag, a text came from my sister. Kids are with me. Go. I looked back at my house once, porch dark, suitcases gone, the fridge holding nothing now but a magnet and an empty space. Then I climbed into the taxi and said the sentence out loud for the first time in 35 years, just to feel how it fit in my mouth. The airport, please. International terminal. Here's what nobody tells you about the mechanics of a first real stand. Your body never gets the memo. My mind had been made up since November, but at the check-in counter, my hands shook so badly I dropped my passport twice, and the agent was kind enough to pretend she hadn't noticed. 20 years of conditioning doesn't die quietly. At my gate, before boarding began, I did the one thing I'd promised myself. There's a version of this story where I slip onto that plane dodging every call. I refused to be that version. I called my mother back. She picked up before the first ring finished. I spoke first, in the register I use with an audited client. Factual, warm, immovable. Mom, I'm at the airport. I want to say this once directly. I told you in writing on November 20th. The kids are safe. They're with their own parents, and the sitter list has been in your inbox for a month. Nobody is stranded here except by choice. What came back started as fury and slid into pure inventory. She named the children one by one, like a roll call of my crimes. Then, their little faces, Nora, on Christmas morning. I watched a plane pushing back slowly from the next gate. I love their little faces, I said. I have loved them for free for 10 straight years, and I am getting on this plane. I hung up before she could reload. The gate slowly filled with the tired humanity of a 6:40 a.m. international connection. I sat very still, my boarding pass folded in quarters, opening and closing it like a nervous habit I'd just invented. An older woman beside me, knitting on her lap, asked where I was headed. I heard myself answer out loud to another human for the first time. Ireland, my grandmother's village. She left there at 19, and nobody's ever gone back. Her needles paused. She looked at me over her glasses. Alone, she asked. Alone, I said. She went back to her knitting with a small, satisfied nod like a judge closing a case. Good for you, she said. Long overdue if you ask me. I have to tell you about 7 a.m. on my porch, because my sister told me every detail later, twice, the second time with a glass of wine. At 6:58, my mother's van pulled into my driveway, my mother driving, my brother riding shotgun, 5 children buckled in the back in Christmas pajamas, because the actual plan had genuinely been to deposit all 5 kids at my door with their bags, right on schedule, as though my no had simply been an inaccurate forecast. My sister was there too, not to drop off her own kids, but because, in her words, somebody needed to witness this. My mother marched up my walk and rang the bell like a landlord. Rang it again. She'd personally heard the word boarding from my own mouth less than an hour earlier and driven over anyway, because in her world, a doorbell has always outranked an airline gate. The porch light was off. Every light was off. My car sat in the driveway. I'd taken a taxi so its presence would say exactly what I needed it to say. She isn't running an errand. She's gone. A third ring, knuckles on the glass. My brother checked his phone, and my mother stepped back off the porch, looked up at my dark house, and it began, slowly, to land. My sister says she watched the whole architecture come down behind our mother's eyes in real time. The itinerary, the church announcements, the suitcases delivered like a shipment, 20 years of certainty. All of it hitting the one variable Diane Whitfield had never budgeted for. A no that stayed a no, even after the doorbell rang. What actually broke her wasn't the closed door. It was the email that landed at exactly 7 a.m., scheduled the night before, because I am my mother's daughter in every way that counts and cuts. One message, 6 inboxes at once. As stated on November 20th, I am unavailable December 21st through 26th. My flight departed at 6:40 a.m. The sitter list is in your inbox. I love you all. N. My brother's phone chimed on my porch. He read it, and my sister says his face flick. Aired between a flinch and reluctant respect. He held up the screen. She's gone. Like actually airborne gone. My mother took the phone, read that single line, and came apart in my front yard. What? This can't be happening. Loud enough that my neighbor across the street turned all the way around. Quieter to the dark house itself, like it might renegotiate. This can't be happening. She doesn't do this. Then my brother, the same one who texted lol drama queen, finally scrolled all the way down through that November email for the first time. The dates, the sitter names, the sentence, I am not asking permission. He read the whole thing standing right there while our mother pressed a hand flat against her chest. My sister says he looked up with the dawning expression of a man finally doing his own math and said the truest sentence he's ever managed. Mom, she told us. In writing. 3 weeks ago. Everyone had already known what she'd say. She'll cave, she always does. The van full of children sat idling in my driveway. The cruise sailed at 4 that afternoon. And I was somewhere over the Midwest, sipping a ginger ale, finally off the clock. The real climax. But I owe you the true climax, because it happened 40 minutes before that scene on my porch. Back at the gate, at 6:10. I've saved it for last, because it belongs entirely to me. They just called pre-boarding when my phone lit up one final time. Mom, I answered it. I want that on the record. I didn't dodge the last call. I stood at the window with the plane huge and pale on the other side of the glass, because whatever came next, I'd decided I would be a woman who faced it directly. Her voice was different this time, not the hostess, not the strategist, cracked open. The cruise leaves at 4, she said. Everything's already paid for, Nora, everything's arranged. A breath. You are ruining this family's Christmas. The gate agent called Group 1. I watched the jet bridge settle against the plane, and then my mother played the last card in her deck, the oldest card there is. Her voice didn't rise this time. It dropped flat and final, the exact tone of a door swinging shut. If you get on that plane, Nora, don't bother coming back to this family. There it was. The sentence my entire life had been quietly arranged around never having to hear. The fear of it had run my calendar for 20 straight years. And standing there, I finally heard it out loud, instead of just echoing inside my chest and out loud. It turned out to be so much smaller than I'd always feared. Just one sentence, from one frightened woman, on a porch that wasn't even hers anymore. Mom, I said, and my voice came out steadier than I'd ever heard it. For 20 years, I bought my seat at your table by making myself disappear. If that seat only exists when I'm useful, it was never actually my seat. I love you, I'm boarding now. I hung up, I didn't turn the phone off. I let it ring in my pocket the whole way down the jet bridge. I wanted to feel exactly what the choice was costing me. The scanner beeped. The flight attendant said, "Welcome aboard." Both things were true. Seat 31A window. We climbed out over the frozen fields, and I watched my whole world shrink into a quilt of white and gray. Somewhere down there was a van full of children who were, I already knew, going to be perfectly fine, and a cruise ship that would sail at 4 with or without its matriarch, and a porch with my mother standing on it. And I cried. I want to be honest about that, because the internet version of this story ends with a smug smile and a cocktail, and the true version is that I cried from wheels up until the drink cart reached row 31. Not the pretty kind. The kind that empties out a storage unit inside you. The woman beside me, a stranger in a red Christmas sweater, pulled a small pack of tissues from her bag and handed it over without asking a single question, which I have since decided is the purest form of love available between two strangers at 35,000 feet. Because here's what I was actually crying about. Not regret. Grief. There's a version of me somewhere that got to have a mother who simply asked, I had spent 35 years waiting for her to show up as that person, and somewhere over the ocean, I finally understood I needed to let her go and grieve the mother I'd been waiting for instead. When it finally passed, what was left underneath was so quiet I almost didn't recognize it. No lists, no timers, nobody about to ring my doorbell. My phone sat in airplane mode, and for the first time in 35 years so was I. I ordered a second ginger ale. I watched the little plane icon crawl across the little map. I slept over an ocean without setting a single alarm for anybody else, and I woke up to green. At baggage claim, phone finally back on, I had 11 missed calls and one voicemail that mattered. My sister. Okay, update from the front lines. Grant and Marissa made tea. Air flight fine. The little ones are already at kids club, they love it. Tyler and I ate the cost of our tickets. We're home with our own kids and honestly, it's actually kind of nice. A pause. Mom and Dad didn't end up going. The cruise line wouldn't refund anything. She's been on the phone with them all morning. A longer pause. And Nora, while I was looking up their number, her texts were open on the counter. I saw the whole thread from October, all of it. Nora volunteered. Don't tell her yet. She'll cave, she always does. A breath. You didn't ruin Christmas. I think Mom's been quietly ruining yours for 20 years and none of us ever once looked at the receipts. So, land safe. Send the kids a picture of a castle. Call me when you're settled. I stood there, letting the empty carousel go around twice, just holding the phone. The village was blue dusk by 4, rain like a rumor, colored fishing boats knocking against the harbor wall, the exact boats from the postcard I checked, standing there jet-lagged with it in my glove. Maeve took one look at me and put me straight in the front room. You'll want the front room, she said. You can hear the sea from the pillow. When she heard whose granddaughter I was, she sat me by the fire, produced 2 neighbors and a tin of biscuits within the hour, and told me about a young woman named Vivian who'd once left in a gale and written letters home that made the whole lane laugh. On Christmas Eve, I went to midnight mass in a small stone church, candlelight everywhere, carols sung in an accent that sounded exactly like my grandmother reading me to sleep. Strangers shook my hand on the way out and wished me a happy Christmas like they meant it, personally, just for me. On Christmas Day, Maeve cooked, and I sat at a table I hadn't set, eating a meal I hadn't planned, being asked questions nobody had ever thought to ask me. I kept almost standing to clear the plates out of habit, and she kept laughing and pointing me back into my chair. On my last morning, I walked down to the harbor early and set Vivian's postcard on the seawall, boats facing boats. And I said the thing out loud I'd flown 4,000 miles to say. We made it, Vivian. Both of us finally did. I flew home on the 27th to a full mailbox and one envelope covered in crayon, a drawing from my niece of an airplane with a stick figure waving out the window, captioned Aunt Nora's trip in letters that got smaller as she ran out of room. It's framed in my office now, next to my license. My mother didn't speak to me again until February. When she finally called, there was no apology and no mention of the cruise. She asked, stiffly, for my stuffing recipe, which, in Diane, is roughly the diplomatic equivalent of a signed peace treaty. The switchboard never fully got its monopoly back. My sister and I talk directly now, sister to sister, no relay, no editing. And the following Christmas, for the first time in my adult life, somebody finally asked. My sister called in early December. Would you want us to come to you, just for an afternoon? Kids, cookies, we'll head out by 6. They came, they knocked. They brought cookies and left right at 6, just like she said. My niece put a brand new drawing up on my refrigerator, right where a boarding pass had once lived. I hosted because I genuinely wanted to, which turns out to be an entirely different holiday altogether. My mother was right about exactly one thing in the end. It really isn't work when it's family, as long as somebody actually asks. That's the whole story. One misdirected text, one email nobody believed at first, one boarding pass pinned to a refrigerator door. If you're the person your family counts on without ever asking, let this be your sign to finally book your someday. Share this with the sister, the aunt, the daughter who needs to hear it tonight. Drop a comment telling me where you'd go first. And hit subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.